What's up, everyone? Welcome to Weekends. I'm Anna Kasparian.
I'm Nando Vila.
What's up, Nando? How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Yeah. You look chipper this morning.
Yeah, I'm feeling chipper. I'm feeling pretty good. I think part of the reason why is, there's just been a lot of really great content put out there recently by people on the left. And I really, really enjoyed a piece that Ben Burgess published in Jacobin this week, which is going to be part of my commentary segment. We're going to talk a little bit about cancel culture. And I know that discussion, it almost seems like a cliche these days in terms of like a topic to discuss. But, I think that one of the perspectives that isn't really represented is the perspective that I'm going to share, the perspective that Michael Brooks wanted to share. And there's a lot of fear behind that because I think it's easy to kind of twist that message and make it seem as though you're an apologist for bad behavior when that's actually not the case at all. But I'm really looking forward to your commentary segment today about supply chains and just like the history of free trade.
Fun stuff. It's going to be great. I think both of our segments were in a way inspired by Michael Brooks because mine is something he talked about a lot as well. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. And so, Michael Brooks would have turned 37 this past week. August 13th is his birthday. And, that was a tough day. I mean, I knew I was going to be a little sad that day, but I was pretty devastated from the moment I woke up. And it's because, there are so many conversations that we would have with him that we would want to have about what's going on in the world right now. Yeah. And really, we want to just keep carrying on with the work that he would want to put out there himself. So in the interview segment, we're going to talk to Leigh Phillips, and we're going to discuss how capitalism puts us in a uniquely terrible position to deal with this pandemic. And we'll also talk to him a little bit about cancel culture because he himself has published a really great piece in Jacobin about it. So we'll discuss that. And our SALT segment, I'm not sure who's saltier. Is it us or is it David Sirota? Because he put out some fire on Twitter recently. So
David Sirota has a very long memory. He's a very, very long memory, and bless him for it. Love it.
I love him so much. He's so great. But before we get to all of that, I really wanted to share a video with all of you that I thought was hilarious. I know you thought it was funny too, Nando. But more importantly, it's the exact kind of video that I wish Michael was around for because it has to do with Elizabeth Warren. So there was big news this past week. Kamala Harris was chosen as Biden's running mate. It wasn't really that shocking. Of course, I have my issues with Kamala Harris's prosecutorial record, but I think out of the list of people he was seriously considering, and I don't think he was seriously considering Karen Bass, I'm just keeping it real. Nope. I think Kamala Harris makes the most sense. Yeah. But with that said, that was a huge blow to
Michael's favorite aspirations. His favorite politician, and my favorite politician, and I think the favorite politician of everyone watching this show, Elizabeth Warren. We love
Elizabeth Warren. And so our wonderful producer, Cale Brooks, sent us this video of Rachel Dolezal sending her condolences to Liz Warren because she wasn't chosen as a VP, as the VP. So let's take a quick look at that video.
Hi, Liz. This is Rachel Dolezal, and I am just sending you a little shout out. I hope this brightens your day a little bit. I hear that you didn't get a promotion that you deserve, and I am so sorry to hear that. I know that sucks to not have the job opportunities or promotions that you worked so hard for. So I've experienced, of course, unemployment for 5 years and counting. And that has been something very hard to get through. So I have a lot of empathy for you and your situation. I know it's hard to just persevere and stay strong when you don't have that affirmation that, you did deserve this. You do have the talent, you do have the ability, and you have everything required for that promotion.
Rachel Dolezal, first of all, a friend of mine, one of my best friends, he saw Rachel Dolezal one time at an In-N-Out in LA. And I was like, man, that is the best celebrity sighting you could possibly have in LA. Like just Rachel Dolezal housing a burger at In-N-Out is kind of just amazing. But everything about that video was perfect. I love just the way she goes, "Hey, Liz."
Like the greatest injustice is the fact that Michael's not around to enjoy that video, right? It really is an injustice.
30-minute breakdown of it, like frame by frame, just analyzing it deeply. He would have said something like, Rachel Dolezal is actually a hero of mine. It's a real tragedy because that would have been some good content.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's not a lot of room for joy these days, especially with the news that's been going on. And I know that it negatively impacted Michael deeply, and, it impacts us as well. And so whenever there are these like little kernels of, I don't know, humor, I guess, that you can kind of inject in the news cycle, I always loved watching him do it because you're right. I mean, he would handle it with his own sense of humor, and I would always crack up, even if I had the worst day. In fact, when Kale sent me that video, I was not in a good mood. I was taking one of my like solitude hikes where I'm like, everyone get the fuck away from me. I just want to be alone in the mountains somewhere. Kale sends us the text. I watched the video and I was like, I feel good now. It wasn't even the hike. It was this video.
It's blessed timeline, blessed group chat. It's good stuff. It's great stuff.
It is.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of great stuff, I wanted to inform all of you guys about a wonderful promotion happening with Verso Books. Verso Books is celebrating 50 years of radical publishing. It was founded in 1970, and Verso publishes radical voices that challenge capitalism and offer far-reaching proposals for social and political change. So now you can actually join the Verso Book Club, and every new ebook, you actually get it each month, as well as one or more new books in the mail if you choose a print subscription. All Verso Book Club members will also get 50% off all books for as long as you are a subscriber. And to celebrate their 50th anniversary and the launch of the book club, each member tier is 50% off for the first 3 months. So that's a really great promotion that they're doing to celebrate their anniversary. Please check them out. These are the kinds of books that publishing houses typically don't publish. And it's so important to support Verso because they get the truth out there. It's like unfiltered, uncensored, content that I think we really need to know about, read about. I know a lot of you are already educated on these issues, but we want to support these authors as well. In August, the books included in the book club are Sensoria, Thinkers for the 21st Century by Mackenzie Wark, Revolutionary Feminisms, Conversations on Collective Action and Radical Thought, edited by Brianna Brondar and Reef Zadah. And also Radical Hamilton, Economic Lessons from a Misunderstood Founder, that's very topical, by Christian Parenti, and a new edition of Nancy Fraser's Fortunes of Feminism. So at this momentous time for global politics, we hope all of you do join Verso in holding capitalism and imperialism to account and supporting a new wave of radical movements around the world.
Nice. Very excited. I mean, the Christian Parenti book looks interesting. Maybe it'll change my mind on Hamilton. Maybe I'll actually watch the play now with a new perspective. Thank you, Christian Parenti, for that.
That's awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, Nando, it's time for your awesome commentary segment.
All righty. Here we go. Okay. Hey, does anyone remember at the beginning of the pandemic when no one could get toilet paper?
Video has emerged of an alarming scene in a Sydney supermarket of two women coming to blows in an argument over the right to buy multiple packets of toilet tissue.
Ah, yes. The great toilet paper shortage of 2020 was just the funniest example of a very troubling thing, namely the vulnerability of our global supply chains. Yes, the coronavirus pandemic has laid bare that the supply chains that we rely on to live are very susceptible to shocks. I mean, the United States, the richest country on earth, could not even manufacture the bare minimum in terms of PPE and masks and the like. And all of this has dealt a major blow to neoliberal globalization fundamentalists. You know who I'm talking about. It's the Thomas Friedmans of the world, the John Stossels of the world. They've been arguing for 30 years that globalization, meaning the unfettered movement of capital and so-called free trade, has been the best thing that has ever happened to the world.
Next time you see the protesters screaming about the evils of free trade and globalization, remember this. A survey found that more than 80% of economists think America should eliminate all trade barriers, all of them. And that would be good. Get rid of these things. All of it. Leave free people alone to make whatever trades they want.
Yeah, it's an updated argument of the one David Ricardo made in the 19th century. You've probably heard it in your high school economics class. He famously used the example of Portuguese winemakers and British cloth manufacturers. He said that the Portuguese were really good at making wine while bad at making cloth. Meanwhile, the English were amazing at making cloth, but really shitty at making wine. No argument there. Therefore, the British should not be making cloth and wine and just stick to cloth, while the Portuguese shouldn't stop making cloth and stick to wine. Then the countries trade and everybody wins. And it's hard to overstate just how deeply this theory is ingrained within our ruling class. It is accepted as absolute fact by everyone from Mitt Romney to Barack Obama and everyone in between. They say that all of this free trade has led to an historic reduction in extreme poverty around the world. Notice the use of the word extreme. And they trot out intellectuals like friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Steven Pinker, to legitimize the argument for them. Steven Pinker has made millions of dollars writing books and giving lectures saying things like this.
Well, any aspect of human well-being that you measure has shown an increase. We live longer, more of us go to school, life is safer, fewer of us die in wars. And the point of the book is not just to document the progress, that's the middle section of the book, and I tried to do it in 75 graphs, knowing that people will be incredulous.
There's a lot of data in the book.
They just won't believe it unless they see the graphs showing poverty declining, showing deaths in war going down.
Yeah, those pesky people, they just won't believe the data. I have 75 graphs. I mean, look, poverty's declining. I mean, elites just love this shit. They eat it up for the simple reason that it makes them feel good about themselves as the winners of a system that has made them richer than ever. It's a way to launder their own sense of guilt. But the reality is very different. There's a new report from Philip Alston, the outgoing United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, meaning the guy whose job it literally was to study this stuff, blows all of that propaganda out of the water. The good rapporteur said the following. Over the past decade, the UN, world leaders, and pundits have promoted a self-congratulatory message of impending victory over poverty. But almost all of these accounts rely on the World Bank's international poverty line, which is utterly unfit for the use of for the purpose of tracking such progress. The World Bank's official poverty line, by the way, is $1.90 a day. Alston continues, the bank line shows the number of people in extreme poverty fell from 1.9 billion in 1990 to 736 million in 2015. But the line is scandalously unambitious, and the best evidence shows it doesn't even cover the cost of food or housing in many countries. The poverty decline it purports to show is due largely to rising incomes in a single country, China. More on that in a sec. And it obscures poverty among women and often those excluded from official surveys, such as migrant workers and refugees. The result is a Pyrrhic victory, an undue sense of immense satisfaction and dangerous complacency. Using more realistic measures, the extent of global poverty is vastly higher and the trends extremely discouraging. Even before the pandemic, 3.4 billion people, nearly half of the world, lived on less than $5.50 a day. That number has barely declined since 1990. And that World Bank statistic is the one most commonly used to show that, in fact, there is nothing to see here, and the system is working great. That anyone who criticizes the system is, in fact, a backward-looking, anti-science, anti-data troglodyte. People, in fact, should stop complaining because everything is awesome and things are only getting better. Well, that's just not true. And as Alston points out, the poverty gains that have occurred are limited almost exclusively to one country, China. And no matter what you think about China, it is true that they have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the last few decades. What's interesting about that, however, is that they did it by ignoring the free trade evangelists. China has actually bucked the neoliberal consensus by instituting pretty strict capital controls and using things like tariffs to allow native industry to develop. Sometimes they outright ban foreign companies from operating within their borders. I used to live in China, and you couldn't use Google and Facebook even back then, allowing their own high-tech industry to catch up using things like WeChat. And now the Chinese technology is in some ways surpassing American tech with things like TikTok and 5G. You're starting to see a split amongst the American ruling class on what to do about China. Some want to be more hawkish against them. Others, like Mike Bloomberg, want to continue having access to their vast markets. It'll be interesting to see who wins that little battle. And ironically, the Chinese learned all of this from the United States, because all of those protectionist policies are what allowed the United States' industry to develop in the 19th and early 20th centuries to become the most powerful in the world. Take a look at this graph that shows US tariffs versus the rest of the industrialized world. From about 1830 to 1930, the United States had the highest tariff rates in the world. That's because in 1830, the economies of England and France were way more developed, and the United States needed to protect its own industry from superior French and English goods. It's no surprise that once the United States became the dominant economy in the world, it changed its tune on all this and began to force countries to lower their tariffs, because free trade benefits the already rich, but preventing the developing world from actually developing. But since 2008, the most vocal criticisms of free trade have come from the xenophobic right. They say that the globalists have brought immigrants here to take our jobs. And on the left, we need to reject that right-wing framing, and we need to recover some of the progress that was made by the anti-globalization movement in the 1990s before it was all destroyed by 9/11. We don't want to advocate for countries to retreat from the international community in fierce competition with each other. We need to foster a spirit of cooperation and use international organizations to check against the power of multinational corporations. We need to establish international standards for labor protections and the environment, and we need to end tax havens, because there's an estimated $32 trillion tucked away in places like Bermuda and Luxembourg. I reckon we can solve a lot of our problems if we were able to get our hands on some of that money. Maybe we could even pay for Medicare for all. But we also need to realize that global supply chains are vulnerable to shocks. Some more rational countries like Finland actually stockpile things like medicine, food, and such in case that there is some sort of trade disruption. I bet they even had enough toilet paper to last through the quarantine. So yeah, this is something that Leigh Phillips talks about a lot, you know? So I'm excited to ask him questions about it.
Yeah, absolutely. He did a really great talk on Jacobin about coronavirus, and how our system of capitalism, again, like really puts us in a terrible position to deal with this pandemic. And I mean, we've been experiencing it firsthand. There's no question about it. But, as you're talking about all of the historical context necessary to understand why our supply chains were disrupted the way they were and how we were really unable to recover effectively, it made me think of two different things that we do critique a lot, but never in the context of free trade. Just like the failure of our education system. That's not to say I don't believe in public education, but let's keep it real. The school boards who make decisions about what ends up in textbooks, I think make a concerted effort to ensure that the historical context that you just mentioned right now about tariffs, for instance, don't actually make it in the textbooks. And then at the same time, the media. So, when you mention that $32 trillion that are stored in, tax shelters, I love that you brought up Medicare for all, because that $32 trillion figure makes me think of what the estimates were for paying for Medicare for all within the time span of 1 decade.
Yeah.
And each reporter, every time they'd interview Bernie Sanders, it was like, how are we going to pay for that? How are we going to pay for that? Literally, if you do nothing else and all you do is find a way to get that money back to the United States where it belongs, you can pay for a decade's worth of single-payer healthcare, meaning every single American has the healthcare they need, the treatment they need for anything, including, optical, dental. It just, we need to think about how, as a country, mostly due to propaganda and ignorance, we've decided that we'd rather allow the wealthy to keep their tax shelters and watch our fellow Americans die from illnesses they don't need to die from.
Well, it's funny when it comes to tax shelters, all of a sudden the ruling class becomes very respectful of a nation's sovereignty, right? You know, like, I mean, these are tiny little countries. In 15 minutes, like if the international community just put pressure on them to change these laws, it would happen in 15 minutes. It's absurd that they, you know, like, well, what, we can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about it. They're a sovereign nation. It's like, yeah, like we respect nation sovereignty in any other context, right? You know, like we just like invade people or bomb people. I mean, I'm not saying we should bomb Bermuda, but you know, if they applied any sort of international pressure on them, they would absolutely end these tax havens in 15 minutes. But yeah, I mean, that's just it's become all this stuff has become kind of very ingrained and almost like accepted like as like a scientific fact, and it's just it's just not true. Like it's just, I mean, it's as anti science as you could be, or you know what I mean, like that's like the kind of argument they use against as a weapon against, you know, critics of some of this stuff. And again, you know, we have to sort of retake the narrative from the right, because like they're doing the thing that the right always does well, which is identify a problem but then offer the incorrect solutions that distract from the actual villains of the whole thing. You know, and liberals, just what they do is like they reject that the problem exists, and then people are like, but wait, no, the problem does exist. And that's why like liberals keep on losing credibility over and over and over again on this kind of thing. They just browbeat people and say like, you know, you're dumb because like, you don't believe in this stuff. And it's like, well, no, you're dumb because you don't believe in this stuff, you know? So
right. And look, so there are people who are just ignorant of the facts and you know, on one hand, it's not like our media does a good job in really informing people on what's going on and why things are the way they are. So like the average citizen, I don't want to be too harsh on them. But I do want to be harsh on, you know, just like the political establishment that wittingly, knowingly perpetuates the lies about the wrong solutions, right? So, you know, when you mentioned the data about how globalization has lifted so many people out of poverty, I mean, I hear that
extreme
talking point
poverty
all the time.
It's always the
always
the caveat, right?
That's true. And it reminded me of the Zizek debate with Jordan Peterson, because it was the talking point that Jordan Peterson kept using. But what we need to understand is whenever you hear someone cite data or make a point like that, the data can always be twisted to fit any narrative. And that's exactly what's been going on when it comes to this notion of free trade. And, you know, when we think of free trade, we also have to think about the fact that it's not just about trading commodities or trading agricultural products. In the case of, you know, trade with China, it was mostly about trading U.S. goods or, you know, U.S. goods or U.S. commodities for incredibly cheap labor. And so not only did that put our supply chain in jeopardy, and we're feeling the consequences of that right now with the pandemic, but more importantly, I mean, we've seen how it has eroded the economic stability for so many Americans throughout, you know, a few decades now. So there are real consequences to that. And it's actually led a lot of people to poverty.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought up the China angle, because there's just a lot of, I think, simplistic thinking about why Donald Trump banned Chinese apps. People think that it's only because Trump was salty about the fact that TikTok users trolled his Tulsa rally. But I mean, during the Obama administration, there was that pivot to China, right? Yeah. Focusing on China. And it has to do with our Silicon Valley fueled economy. If you look at, you mentioned this to me, Nando, if you look at the stock market, I mean, the only industry that's doing really well in the stock market during the pandemic is Silicon Valley. Yeah. And the Trump administration wants to protect that.
I will never forget Barack Obama going on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon to slow jam the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was the free trade agreement that was written in secret by corporate attorneys and like was supposed to be rammed through Congress without anyone actually reading it or seeing what was inside of it. He went on Jimmy Fallon to slow jam. You know how he has that segment, Slow Jam the News? Obama went on to slow jam the TPP. It's one of the most embarrassing liberal things I've ever seen. I encourage you to go on YouTube and look for it. It's probably still there. I'll never forget it. It's just ingrained in my memory forever. It's
amazing. I actually haven't seen it, so I got to check that out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Now I am going to, I guess, do something a little risky considering today's climate, but I hope everyone keeps an open mind and consider the nuanced perspective I have on so-called cancel culture. So on August 13th, Michael Brooks would have turned 37 years old. He was a good friend of mine, a good friend of Ben Burgess, who recently wrote a wonderful piece in Jacobin about Michael and what his upcoming project was going to be about. It's titled The Cosmopolitan Socialism of Michael Brooks. And, I think Ben did such a great job in giving this nuanced description of what Michael believed and how he saw the socialist project really accomplished in the United States. And what that really focuses on is rejecting some of the toxicity, a lot of the toxicity that comes along with cancel culture. So, a lot of what Ben said in his piece really rang true based on conversations I personally had with Michael. And I really appreciated Ben doing that because this is a topic that I think a lot of people feel terrified to approach because it might seem as though you're just serving as an apologist for incredibly bad behavior, maybe some speech that people find worthy of condemnation. But at the same time, if you take a step back and you think about things on an actual moral level, and you think about things strategically as a socialist who wants to accomplish a better country and a better world, a lot of this stuff is actually running counter to what we want to do. So after reading his piece, I went ahead and found this tweet by Michael in January of 2019. And in the tweet, he writes, "Choosing compassion in a call-out culture." And the article that he linked to in that tweet was written by a writer named Aaron Rose. He is a transgender man who worked as a diversity and inclusion specialist. And I honestly hadn't seen that tweet or read that article until recently. And so as I was reading it, I thought it was so enlightening, especially considering what Aaron would do for work, which is, go to different workplaces and train the workforce to be accepting of people who are different than them. Now, on a surface level, that sounds awesome, right? I mean, on a surface level, you want tolerance, you want acceptance, you want everyone to get along. But what Aaron found through this process was something counter to what the actual mission was. So Aaron writes, relying on a call-out culture of shame and dehumanization, however subtle or justified, as motivating tools of change will never resolve the isolation and exclusion we ultimately seek to address. So he also talks about his own experience as an inclusion specialist and how isolating and divisive it ended up being. So I want to read you a little excerpt about that. While doing the work of humanizing historically excluded minorities, I had been unwittingly dehumanizing others. It seemed natural to view my work as an us versus them quest to change some of people's minds on behalf of others. But I've come to understand that this approach will only continue to amplify the feeling of uneasy disconnection that characterizes so much of modern life, particularly online. The fear of being judged, the fear of being harmed, the fear that saying the wrong thing will result in excommunication. And that fear is real. I mean, that fear is so real that I really had to sit and think about whether I wanted to do this segment because of what I've seen online. And, the justifications that I've even seen from people on the left, these arguments about cancel culture isn't real. The people complaining about cancel culture are individuals who have these massive platforms and have a ton of privilege. And so there's really no negative impact of what people are calling out here when it comes to cancel culture. But really the truth is it has impacted and negatively impacted the livelihoods of so many private citizens who, might have tweeted something that was wrong. There's no question about it. But we need to step back and as a society question whether or not we, especially as socialists, feel comfortable destroying the livelihoods of people who made a mistake. And we also need to have a moment of self-reflection to accept the fact that we are all flawed. We all have our bad moments, and we would want to be treated with compassion, right? And so why is it that we're now finding ourselves in this toxic culture where we've decided that people are irredeemable, worthy of being canceled, and shouldn't be able to work where they've been working, shouldn't be able to find a job anywhere else? I mean, that really should be the antithesis of what we believe as socialists, right? And so Ben cites some portions of Michael's book, and it really, really hits home, especially considering some of the stuff that we're seeing today. So Michael's book is Against the Web. Please check it out if you haven't already. And in it, he writes, "I'm not arguing that no one on the left has ever said or done anything racist or sexist or transphobic, or that we shouldn't care if they do. I'm also not claiming that we should disavow the historical importance of identity in favor of a simplistic economic reductionism that tells people not to worry about merely cultural issues. That's exactly the wrong way to fight the vampire's castle," citing an essay that, had a profound impact on Michael. He shared it with me, and I think everyone should read it if you haven't already. He continues to write in his book, "What I am saying, however, is that we will continue to devour each other and thus fail to win power in society if we don't reject the confused moralism that permeates so much left-wing discourse." And you know what? We really did get a big old taste of that confused moralism just this past week. And it had to do with a progressive candidate in Massachusetts' first district. Alex Morse is his name. He's actually primarying a pretty disgusting corporate Democrat, Richard Neal, who squashed legislation that would end surprise medical billing. That's the kind of corporate Democrat Richard Neal is. We as people who want a better country, who want to actually pass policies like the Green New Deal or Medicare for All, should fight aggressively to get someone like Alex Morse elected. But it doesn't really take much for the left to turn on someone like Morse. All you need to do is put out ridiculous, vague, nonsensical allegations against him, and the left will turn on him in an instant. So that's what happened this past week. Well, it's been going on for a little more than a week, but the college Democrats at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where Alex Morse used to teach, he's now the mayor of Holyoke, and again, he's a congressional candidate. They put out this letter alleging Alex Morse of doing things that made them uncomfortable when he was a lecturer, essentially an adjunct professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, right? So this is this is when he was between the ages of 25 and 30. He's a young guy. And I should also note that he's gay because the hit job that I'm about to describe has an extra layer of a homosexual trope involved that really disgusts me and shows you just how unbelievably toxic cancel culture can really be. So these college Dems put out this letter telling Morse that he's no longer invited to their events. And then they list all of these allegations against him. And I'm not even kidding, this was a literal allegation against him, matching with students on dating apps like Tinder and Grindr when he was an adjunct professor. So in order to match with anyone, right, you would have to note in your profile that you're looking for a certain demographic. Remember, he's between the ages of 25 and 30. And there are students in colleges between the ages of 25 and 30, and you can match with anyone, right? It's a two-way street. And so he matched with students and they thought that was good enough. If he's matching with students, well, then he must be a predator. We're going to list this as something that makes him, not worthy as a candidate in this congressional race. Having sex with students, by the way, none of which were his actual students. So he was accused of having sex with students at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and its like sister schools. Okay, just so ridiculous. Sending messages to students that made them feel uncomfortable. So they allege that Morse would use some of these campus Democrats events to pick up college students, and then he would proceed to add them on Instagram and send them messages that made them uncomfortable. So later, it turned out that these allegations were nonsense. Even before we had evidence that these allegations were nonsense, I called it out and I said that it was pretty sickening to see people on the left repeat or regurgitate some of this stuff, because it was so clearly a hit job. It was so clearly the weaponization of cancel culture to destroy a candidate who really does threaten the material interests of the wealthiest people in this country, right? But leftists fell for it, and it was devastating. I'm going to give you a few examples right now. So these are tweets that emerged after these allegations came out. Disqualifying, pure and simple. I'm sorry to the survivors of this misconduct. Okay, great. The College Democrats of Puerto Rico also chimed in on this, sending our support to College Dems of Massachusetts and to the survivors who bravely told their stories. By the way, no one was on the record with their names. Everything was incredibly vague. And we didn't hear from a single person who actually engaged in any type of intimacy with Alex Morse. Let me give you more. This is so disappointing to see as a colleges college Dem alum and former, until now, supporter of his campaign. I'm glad that the people targeted by this misconduct spoke out. I'll give you one more. He can only have sex with someone of an equal power level. If he has sex with someone of lower power, he's an opportunist. If he has sex with someone at a higher power level, he's unable to make his own decisions. We are now a caste system. And remember, he had no power over anyone that he allegedly had sex with. He did admit that he had sex with college students, but he was young himself, and none of them were his college students. And, this never-ending backlash over a ridiculous story that should never have been published in the first place led to calls for an investigation. And as you can expect, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst publicly announced that they will investigate. UMass Amherst hires lawyer to investigate allegations against Alex Morse. Then you have the presumptive representative, Jamal Bowman, who just won in a stunning upset in New York against a corporate Democrat, Elliot Engel. He decided to distance himself immediately and release this statement. As a school principal, I believe it's important to listen to students and to be sensitive to the unequal power dynamics in these relationships. That's why I've decided to put a pause on my endorsement and any campaign activity for Alex Morse while we learn more about the situation. And after Bowman's statement, we also learned that the Sunrise Movement, which, by the way, has not rescinded this statement, decided to distance themselves as well. Bowman's statement comes after the Sunrise Movement suspended its campaigning for Morse. Additionally, the group's Western Massachusetts Coalition announced on Monday that its members voted to rescind its endorsement of the Holyoke mayor. Yeah, but maybe they should have actually looked into these allegations and gave their ally, someone who is literally a political ally, the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they decided to immediately, and I'm going to use it, I'm going to use this phrase, they decided to immediately virtue signal, to claim moral superiority, to claim that they're the good guys, and that they are willing to, at the drop of a dime, turn their backs on someone who actually wants to fight alongside them for the policies they claim to care about the most. But I guess climate change isn't really that important when you can go ahead and signal to the world that you're morally superior, right? Absolutely pathetic. And then guess what? We learned the truth about these allegations. Let's watch.
One of the things that the students had alleged was improper was that he had added students to his close friends' stories on Instagram. And they use language something like, in a way that is commonly known to indicate intimacy in our generation, something like that. Okay, so now it looks like, based on this Intercept reporting, we have that conversation in question. Here's what they said. Thank you. Good to see you too. How's the rest of your weekend? Alex Morse says, really controversial stuff there. The student replies, pretty good. I went home last night to surprise my mom for her birthday. How about you? Pretty. So Morse then says, that's nice. How was that? I had an event to go to last night to speak, then had a wine tasting party at a friend's house. Now I'm in North Adams about to march in a parade. Okay, so that is the conversation in question.
Reading that thing.
The Intercept also got
you should have given a little warning there.
Trigger, I know, it's offensive to people. I do apologize in advance. And so the students communicated to each other as part of this setup. They were like, read that message. Also, don't mind me totally leading him on. And then Ennis goes on to say, this will sink his campaign.
This will sink his campaign. So who is Ennis? Well, that's Timothy Ennis, who was at the time the head of the University of Massachusetts Amherst Democrats, campus Democrats. And he described himself as, I'm not even kidding, this is real, a Richard Neal stan. Richard Neal is the corporate Democrat who Tim Ennis thought would give him, you know, an entry into the world of politics. Apparently, Richard Neal, a politician, a corporate Democrat, was teaching a journalism class on campus that Ennis was taking. I mean, the story just gets more and more bizarre. So due to his, you know, career goals, Ennis decided to try to help Richard Neal out by sinking Morris's campaign in the most disgusting, toxic way possible. But what I want to have people really understand is that the current culture we're living in had already primed us to accept normal human activity, right? A person like Morris having sex, which is normal human activity. We were primed to think that that's unacceptable. We were primed to think that we have to publicly condemn him in order to signal to the world that we're good people. And it was so devastating to see that happen because, first of all, it relied on a homophobic trope, right? This idea that a gay man was preying on these young boys. That was really the, you know, underlying issue here. And, you know, that culture of cancel culture, again, primed us to accept that, right? As a reality, as a truth. And you know, publicly condemn this person who hadn't done anything wrong. It's absolutely disgusting. And so, look, I think that there is a moral issue here. I mean, I think if you really care about morality above everything else, how is it moral to destroy the life and the career aspirations of an ally, you know, just based on nothing, based on the most vague accusations, and the vague accusations themselves, even if true, didn't indicate that he did anything wrong. No one accused him of having sex with one of his own students. No one. So what exactly did he do wrong? I literally don't understand it. So is he just not allowed to have sex? And it made me think of like the Reagan era and how conservative culture became in that era because of Reagan's policies and because of all the fear mongering that happened with AIDS and HIV. And so I'm like, wow, when did leftists become, you know, worse than conservatives in the Reagan era when it comes to our lives, our personal lives, our culture, all of that? And so there's that portion of it, but there's one other portion that I want to talk about. And this is really what Michael wanted to focus on, because there's a strategic component as well. The left needs to appeal to a broader base of people. We just do. And you're not going to do that. It's not going to be an appealing, you know, fight to join if you're constantly worried, if you're living in fear about something in your personal life going public, and then people twisting your personal life into something that's worthy of condemnation, right? And I think all of us know this. I think all of us feel this. I think all of us are constantly walking on eggshells. It does absolutely nothing to improve the lives of people who have been disenfranchised in this country. All we've been seeing is a bunch of superficial change to give us the optics of reform. Things like renaming things or condemning certain people or firing certain people. But when you take a step back and you look at what's happening and how society is changing, are we noticing any fundamental reform in the way disenfranchised people are treated in this country? We're not. We're not. And we might get a little bit of a, you know, like a rush by seeing someone's life get destroyed if you disagree with them politically. I mean, I think that's weird and questionable anyway. But other than that, what happens to really improve your life or the life of others? And how do we just run away from this ideology and focus on something that's a little more compassionate, that understands that people are flawed, but create a society where we're willing to engage in dialogue with people in order to help them evolve. And Michael really did that for me, not when it comes to racial issues or cultural issues, but he did that to me when it comes to, just my views on capitalism and socialism. I didn't even realize how much of a capitalistic bubble I was operating under. I didn't really understand the critiques or criticisms of capitalism. And to be quite honest with you guys, every time I would engage in any type of conversation about capitalism with leftists, it came from this incredibly judgmental and pretentious place that made me want to reject their arguments. But Michael came at it from a completely different perspective. He brought me in, he was understanding, he was patient, he was kind. And I learned more from him than literally any other person in, the media landscape because of his willingness to hear me out and not judge me, right? So we need to think about that as we try to build the socialist, movement in America. And, one of the people that Michael really turned to when it came to some clarity on this issue was Dr. Cornel West. And I promise I'm almost done with this segment, but I do want to leave you with what Cornel West has to say about cancel culture and what he refers to as, fortified solidarity.
Well, I think the first thing to say is fundamentally it's not about identity. It's about solidarity. It's not about your skin pigmentation. It's about the quality of your courage connected to poor and working people. I don't believe in canceling anybody. I mean, Christians don't believe in canceling people. Everybody can bounce back. I believe everybody's a brother and sister, and they have the capacity to be changed and transformed. So I don't believe in canceling anybody whatsoever. But I do, in fact, say that when we talk about wokeness, I'm not talking about just being woke, because you can be obsessed with wokeness and suffer from insomnia. I'm talking about being fortified. Are you a fighter in the long run? We don't want people woke and sprinters and run out of gas, and the next thing you know, they end up well-adjusted to injustice. That's like so much of the bourgeoisies, no matter what color they are. Middle-class folk that just can't wait to be engaged in upward mobility in order to go mainstream and become a new star with all the spectacle and overlook what's going on the ground of people who are suffering. That's not the model. The model is Martin King, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ella Baker. What are they talking about? Fortified. Are you fortified for the long run? Do you have your cemetery clothes on? Are you coffin ready to live and die for something bigger than you, like a fundamental transformation of a capitalist civilization? That's my tradition.
Amazing.
That video is so incredible. So incredible. So Nando, I want to bring you in. God, I love that video so much because, the thing that I've been just puzzled about is how do you dedicate your life to being part of a movement? Let's say you've joined Sunrise, you're putting in the hours, you're putting in the work, you understand the threat of climate change in this country. And then you so easily, not in this country, in this world, I mean, and then you so easily turn your back on an ally who understands the importance of that fight. I mean, and so is your activism, is it genuine? It makes me wonder, or is that part of your career trajectory? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think what Cornel West talked about at the end there is the key is that, even so many people, I mean, it's normal in a way that have internalized the logic of neoliberalism, competition, that we're all kind of in competition with each other. Even people who understand that kind of intellectually have internalized that. That's why you see people in the Sunrise movement, and I don't want to single out the Sunrise movement, but just in general, even on the left, who have internalized that sort of desire for upward mobility, and that often just comes at the expense of other people, right? So it's just, but that's the system we exist in. We have to transcend that. I mean, that's something that Michael always talked about, is you have to transcend that somehow. It's living within you in a way, it's been beaten into our brains since we were children. So yeah, I mean, and it's just, first of all, your commentary was spectacular and incredibly well done. And it got me thinking about how, the real kind of horseshoe theory is that, wokeness in a way is often kind of accepts the premises and logical conclusions of insane white supremacists, this idea that you cannot have any power imbalance in a relationship leads to some pretty weird conclusions. For example, any interracial relationship, there's going to be an inherent power imbalance. If a white man dates a black woman, Whatever, you're just gonna like, how do you navigate that? You know, like, are you supposed to like not do that because there is a power imbalance there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I
that
met my
leads to-
husband when he was an employie at a nightclub.
Hell yeah.
I mean, there's a power imbalance. I know. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a power imbalance there, and I mean, he seemed to like it. But just keeping it real. But I mean, I just want to live in a society where we're not judging the personal lives of two consenting adults. Like, what are we doing?
No, yeah, it's insane. I mean, people tried to cancel Glenn Greenwald for his relationship with his husband, and it's really toxic and it's insane, and it's just a huge barrier that we have to overcome to like you said, build a mass movement. And it's just this Alex Morse thing also just got me thinking about how short our memories are and how we need to learn. I mean, Jamal Bowman, he's new to politics, and in a way, I don't blame him. I understand that the problem is the culture that exists and that he's entering. But like, look what they did to Jeremy Corbyn. You know what I mean? Like these are, and it's been revealed beyond any reasonable doubt that was just a pure hatchet job. You know what I mean? And many people on the left, like good, well-intentioned people, like accepted those premises. And it's just like, you just got to see a hatchet job for what it is. And it was so painfully obvious. And you just have to you have to be able to be strong and support your allies when there's just the slightest bump in the road, because if not, we're just going to fall apart every single time. And the people in power are very, very smart about this stuff. They know how to exploit these insane kind of things, and they're like, oh my God, this is going to sink his campaign. I just like that guy Ennis, man. What kind of psycho do you have to just be like a 20-year-old college Democrat who's like a Richard Neal stan and wants to just like end the career? You know what I mean? Like, it's just really terrifying.
I mean, Ennis, for people like Ennis, it's like two consenting adults, effing. Yeah. Unacceptable. Like, we're going to go ahead and demonize. But Richard Neal effing you when it comes to your healthcare, that's okay. I stand Richard Neal. Yeah.
Listen, Bill Clinton is going to have a prime speaking spot at the DNC. He's going to be a keynote speaker. Liberals are going to gush over it. They're going to love it. This is a man, if we want to talk about problematic sexual encounters, power imbalances. I mean, a 22-year-old unpaid intern at the White House when you're the president of the United States, not to mention all the Epstein stuff. So yeah, recognize bad faith when it comes. I mean, and that's the lesson you have to understand is like, it's all bad faith. They don't actually believe in any of this shit. It's going to be used as a cudgel against the left. That's what you have to realize. It's just, it's never going to be used to cudgel against them. They're going to survive all this stuff always. It's just because they have power. It's going to be used against people who don't have power, who are trying to challenge that power. So you have to transcend that and transcend it within yourself. Transcend it within yourself.
And understand that, the fight is bigger than you. Michael preached a lot about having a little humility. And I do think that's important because once you feel the need to publicly call someone out, just take a step back and ask yourself, like, hey, how would I feel if someone knew about this crappy thing that I did in my past? And we've all done crappy things. Come on. Like, I'm
trying to think flawed. What's my worst moment, like, and if that was aired publicly. I mean, I just feel so bad for Alex Morse. I mean, this just has to be like the most traumatic, painful thing. Like every single time he engages like with someone romantically, he's going to be in the back of his mind. He's going to be thinking like, oh my God, like, it's impossible not to.
I saw it happen like firsthand to Cenk Uygur when he was running for California's 5th congressional district. It was one of the most difficult, devastating things to watch happen in real time, especially as someone who I've been close with for over 13 years. I know him really well. Yeah. And cancel culture has been used as a weapon to destroy the left, and it has worked. It has worked. And that's what we need to be cognizant of. Yeah. All right. Why don't we move on to our interview? You want to introduce?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very excited to have Leigh Phillips join us. Leigh Phillips is one of the smartest, boldest, best thinkers on the left, in my opinion. He's an author, science writer. He wrote a book called The People's Republic of Walmart. He wrote another book called Austerity, Ecology, and the Collapse of Porn Addicts, A Defensive Growth. I see what you did there. Progress, Industry, and Stuff. Leigh, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Good to be here.
So, Leigh, I remember listening to you on Chapo, I want to say like a year ago or something, and you kind of predicted this pandemic stuff, not the actual pandemic, but the weakness of our ability to deal with a potential pandemic. So I wanted to ask you about that. Like, how have you been living through this, knowing that you kind of saw it coming, that you were kind of a Nostradamus for all of this?
Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty weird. I mean, I'm just reporting on this stuff. I would imagine that the clinicians, the coronavirus specialists, the public health officials who've been warning about these problems specific to coronaviruses, but also with other issues related to infectious disease, particularly around antibiotic resistance for years. I imagine they are very frustrated and furious that this is being allowed to happen. You know, hundreds of thousands of deaths, and we knew this was coming. And all of them, from the get-go, have said that the fundamental problem is a lack of market incentive. So these aren't radicals. These aren't democratic socialists saying this. These are just specialists in their own field. After the SARS outbreak in 2003, and then about 10 years later, the MERS outbreak, Middle East respiratory syndrome, two other novel coronaviruses, they were putting out papers, review articles, making public statements saying that the fundamental problem is that there aren't enough patients with these what turned out to be smaller outbreaks, but we didn't know that they were going to be small. They're in some cases, particularly with MERS, they're simply in the wrong place. So in the Middle East, the patients aren't going to be wealthy enough to care about. Then the sort of coronaviruses the endemic coronaviruses, that is the ones that are just around, that we've dealt with for hundreds, thousands of years, which cause some amount of the common cold. The impact is simply too mild for drug companies to care about. And the fundamental problem here is that the huge, high cost of drug and vaccine development means that if there isn't, there aren't enough people to buy the product, it's not going to be profitable. And you can compare that to, it costs about, roughly about $1 billion US for every new molecular entity, or, effectively drug. So if you're going to be spending $1 billion to develop that, to take it through clinical trials, and at the end of that, you have somebody who, let's even say that it's successful with the case of antibiotics. You're taking antibiotics, a course of antibiotics for maybe a few days, few weeks, with tuberculosis, maybe a few months at the most. And then if it's working, you don't take it anymore. Well, compare that to some drug for a chronic disease for which the patient has to take the drug every day for the rest of their life. Yeah. It's just the market incentive pushes the company in that direction and away from developing antibiotics. And they got out of the development of antibiotics, out of vaccines for about 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
Wow. It makes a lot of sense. But oftentimes the argument you hear from libertarians is, without the incentive for innovation that comes from capitalism, you wouldn't have the development of new drugs or vaccines. It's really it's the financial incentives that pressure people or at least incentivize people to develop these types of medicines and vaccines and services. And so what's your response to that? So let's say, we're functioning under a socialistic society where we're not relying on free markets for innovation. How do you envision pharmaceuticals to be developed, innovated,
Right. Well, there's 2 things to say about that. The first is that there's nothing wrong with these companies when they're producing something that we need, if it's profitable. So that's great. I'm happy that they're doing that. The problem comes when we know that we need to develop something, but it isn't profitable, or it's even insufficiently profitable, and they just won't produce it. The second thing that I would say is that The reality is the vast majority of medical research is not actually performed by the large pharmaceutical companies, but instead by government laboratories or university laboratories, effectively funded by the public sector. The story that libertarians tell about the bravery, the risk taking of entrepreneurs in the private sector, it's just not really true. What we need is we need to take pharmaceuticals out of the private sector and put them entirely into the public sector. In Canada, in much of Western Europe, healthcare has largely been taken out of the private sector. And that's great. You don't have that in the United States yet, which is unfortunate. But even in these places, we've basically only done half the job. The other half of the job of bringing social justice to healthcare is to take pharmaceuticals out of the private sector and effectively nationalize them. And then when we recognize that there's something that we need to do and it isn't profitable, we can cross-subsidize that by spending the money, the revenues that we get from the profitable drug.
Mm-hmm. So
basically,
something that really... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, basically like the postal model, really. It takes a lot of labor, and it's very expensive to send a letter from New York to Anchorage, Alaska, but you don't pay that much more to do it. What happens is that those routes that are highly profitable, where there's great population centers, they cross-subsidize the sending of letters or packages or whatever to those other areas. That's in the public postal service. And the idea behind that was that regardless of where you live in the United States or in Canada or where it happens to be, no matter if you're in a remote rural area, by dint of being a citizen, you have the right to the same access to communications as anybody in a major city. And we should say exactly the same thing with pharmaceuticals. The profitable drugs would subsidize the unprofitable ones.
Yeah, I love that you drew that parallel, because if you look at privatized delivery companies like UPS or FedEx, they do not deliver to rural parts of the country. In fact, what they'll do is they'll deliver it to one other like densely populated part of the country and then rely on the postal service to deliver to rural areas. So I think that parallel is really important. So when the pandemic began, I remember having a conversation with Nando and Michael actually about what Bernie Sanders should do. At that point in the primary election, it wasn't really set in stone that Biden was the candidate. Of course, he lost a bunch of states during Super Tuesday at that point, but it's still, there was a tiny possibility. And I thought, you know what, maybe if Bernie Sanders uses this opportunity to really highlight the failures of the healthcare system that we have, this privatized model, well, then maybe people will finally get it, because at that point, tens of millions of people had already lost their jobs and they lost the health insurance that came along with those jobs. And so the whole argument by corporate Democrats really started to fall apart. But now fast forward to where we are in the election. Joe Biden's the candidate. He's chosen Kamala Harris as his VP. And he was asked for the second time on the record what he would do about a single-payer healthcare bill that lands on his desk. Would he veto it? And here's what his answer was.
The pandemic has exposed, as I've mentioned, so many weaknesses in the healthcare system. The most vulnerable, often Black and brown communities, have been handling much of the financial burden. Before the pandemic, you were against comprehensive single-payer system. Now, if Medicare for All came across your desk as the pandemic has hit so hard, would you veto it?
It's not going to come across my desk, but look, the pandemic has not only torn through our nation, devastating families and wrecking economies, it's exacerbated some of the worst inequities. I'm going to fight for health equities, but you don't need, the quickest way to get that is for Black and Latino Americans to have access to the Obamacare with a public option. That's the quickest way we can get everybody covered.
But hasn't this pandemic and the tsunami of layoffs shown the limits of private health care that is tied to employment?
No, it hasn't, in my view. There's countries that have, in fact, single-payer systems that hadn't helped them very much either. The question is, what do we do about rallying the pandemic and treating those who are affected by it? Everyone who's affected by the pandemic is access to free care for anything having to do with that pandemic.
So that answer blows my mind, especially considering what we're dealing with right now in the United States. And I mean, think about it. He would have that legislation on his desk, which would mean it passed, with bipartisan votes. And he wouldn't commit to avoiding a veto. But I wanted to get your response to that, Leigh.
It's utterly irrational from an epidemiological perspective. The man clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. In the United States, millions of people have lost their health care, which means that going and being tested, or when drugs become, therapeutics come available, when a vaccine comes available, it means that they will be scared to go and get tested. They'll be scared to take the drugs because of the cost and the vaccine. That means that the virus will continue to propagate through society. In every single other Western country, nobody has lost their job, their healthcare as a result of losing their jobs. This is the fundamental problem with only looking at healthcare in terms of sort of inequities between the patients themselves. Even the rich are threatened by the lack of Medicare for all because that virus continues to propagate. It's the same as if you don't provide Medicare to immigrants, even to so-called illegal immigrants, they will be scared of going to the hospital, to clinics, to see if when they get a little sore throat or whatever, and then it later turns out to be the coronavirus. They're scared to do that. That means that those people in the wealthy communities and their gated communities are still threatened by the virus. It makes sense even for rich people for there to be Medicare for all.
Yeah, it's really just absolutely infuriating. But Leigh, I want to ask you about planning, because that's something that you've written about a lot about, the People's Republic of Walmart. It's the sort of boogeyman that is used by critics of the left, that if you have planning in any economy, chaos ensues, mass death, famine, all that stuff is attributed to this idea of planning, and that you need to let the market just kind of decide, millions of people engaging in little micro interactions in the market is what actually kind of creates the best outcomes or whatever. Can you give your thoughts? Because it really is, I think, just a critical thing to push back on. And I think no one has written more confidently or aggressively as you have on this.
Sure. I mean, in the People's Republic of Walmart, Michał Wozworski and myself, my co-author, we basically do a sort of introductory history to the what's called the economic calculation debate, also known as the socialist calculation debate, which was, it emerged in the 1920s, and it was a debate between conservative and left-wing economists. And the conservative economists basically said, I mean, I'm really simplifying here, but basically said that, you could plan perhaps very simple sectors like coal or steel or something like that with a very small number of inputs and outputs. But the minute that you get to trying to plan much more complicated systems, that there's simply too many variables involved for any set of bureaucrats or even a computer to keep track of. And that invariably that will result in mismatches between supply and demand. The gaps and shortages will cause chaos. That chaos will in turn result in a demand for hard man. Therefore, you'll have authoritarianism, and there you go. That's the story of the Soviet Union. That's the explanation as to why the Soviet Union was so dreadful with respect to human rights. Well, it's actually the other way around. What we try to show within, and I think we do comprehensively show in the book, is that today we have corporate entities, firms on the scale of Walmart or Amazon, who are engaged in, the Walmart is, roughly the size, a little bit smaller, but roughly the size of the Soviet Union at its height of its economy in the 1970s, with many, many, many more variables involved in the planning of production and distribution internally. So even though it operates externally in the market, internally, all the decisions are made by planning. There's no sort of competition between different managers and workers to find out who's going to bid the highest price to get, Jill to move a box from one shelf over to another shelf. They just tell the people to do this. So it is planning on this vast scale, roughly on the scale of the Soviet economy. And it works tremendously well. The problem for us as progressives, as socialists, however, is that it's planning, but not in the service of ordinary people, of society. It's planning only in the interest of the shareholders, or in the case of Walmart, the Walton family. So really the question around planning is not whether it works or doesn't work. It clearly does. There's lots of evidence to show that it does. It's in whose interest.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And the one thing that it took me a while to really grasp this, because I used to believe that, rather than making something public, like let's say nationalizing healthcare, you could possibly, keep it under a privatized model, but just regulate it effectively enough so people don't get left behind. But they always find a way to skirt those regulations or engage in corruption or literally legalize bribery in order to change the laws and regulations that, would impact their profit motive. And so just real quick, going back to what you said earlier about people feeling afraid to go to the doctor because of the high costs. There was some new data out that showed during the pandemic, private healthcare companies in the United States literally doubled their profits. And the reason why they doubled their profits is because people are afraid to go to the doctor. So they just they don't take advantage of any of the services. They just stay at home and hope for the best. And we're functioning under this incredibly broken model. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about, cancel culture, because you wrote a great piece about it in Jacobin. In researching for my own segment on this, I came across that piece and I wanted to share a few excerpts because I think there's a common misconception about who cancel culture negatively impacts. There's this idea that it's only people in positions of power who are complaining about it, and they're just worried about dealing with some criticism. But there are real consequences for people based on valid political speech. So you give these two examples. In 2014, the University of Illinois withdrew an offer of employment to English professor Stephen Saleta after some faculty, students, and donors asserted that his tweets critical of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration during the Gaza war were anti-Semitic. Due to the controversy, he's been driven out of academic employment and now works as a bus driver. Also, political scientist Norman Finkelstein, another critic of the Israeli occupation, was denied tenure at DePaul University in 2007 after a successful campaign by the Anti-Defamation League and lawyer Alan Dershowitz. He likewise it's amazing. He likewise has difficulty finding employment and says he struggles to pay the rent. And so, this idea that, the only people complaining about cancel culture are these people who have power, they have money, they have these giant platforms, and they don't really suffer any consequences of what they're complaining about. But, first of all, I think a lot of that is they inflate the power of these people to begin with. But there are private citizens and there are academics who have been ousted from their jobs, from their careers, because everything has become, I guess, worthy of cancellation. And I wanted you to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's turkeys voting for Christmas when the left supports cancel culture, when the left sneers at conceptions of free speech as free speech, when it abandons other civil liberties norms like due process and presumption of innocence. The minute that we give up on this stuff, it will be used absolutely by the right against us. And the two examples there of Stephen Saleta and Norman Finkelstein are sort of clear examples. In the province of Ontario in Canada, there have been multiple efforts by the provincial government to try to ban Palestine solidarity activities from university and college campuses. And Canada actually doesn't have strong free speech protections in the way that the United States does, just because of historical reasons. And so the grounds that the politicians are using to try to ban this from campus is that it's hate speech. And of course, this is being whipped up by the sort of the worst apologists for the Netanyahu regime in Israel. But why is a science journalist writing suddenly about cancel culture and free speech? The reason that I come to this issue, one is because as a journalist, I'm always very interested in defending the right of speech, but mainly because I write a lot about climate change and energy systems, and throughout the 2000s, when I was just getting started with my career, you saw in the United States under George W. Bush, he was muzzling climate scientists and and conservation biologists. The government of Canada under a conservative government of Stephen Harper was doing the same thing, muzzling climate scientists, as was Tony Abbott, the conservative Prime Minister of Australia. So for me, it was just so obvious that the left has to fight for free speech, because the minute that we abandon this, the right will use the rationale that we have, or the liberal left that has abandoned free speech, to turn that against us.
And why do you think that why do you think the left has been so enthusiastic to adopt all this? Like, what do you think is going on there? Why have the turkeys voted for Christmas, so to speak, on the left?
I mean, there's a lot of things that have gone into this, but I think, and this comes back to a lot of the discussions that we're having on the left at the moment around it's an ill-defined term, and I accept that it's problematic, but basically the professional managerial class, or PMC. I feel that in the 1970s and 1980s, when the neoliberal regimes of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and so on and so forth around the world were historically victorious in breaking the power of the trade unions and the working class, the left began to sort of be partially separate from the working class, whereas previously, while it wasn't necessarily synonymous, there were always people who had been sort of middle class or upper class, who were class traders and sided with the working class, and there were some workers who were who voted Tory, who voted Republican. Nevertheless, broadly, you could say the left and the working class were more or less the same thing. Since the victory of neoliberalism and breaking the power of the working class and trade unions, these two things have separated. And there's a series of pathologies that I think operate within a sort of a left that is entirely built out of the middle class, around some of the things what Anna was just talking about, and you were talking about, Nando, with respect to the careerism, and this sort of pushing people down. And whereas the social weight of the trade unions, the social weight of the working class, when they come up against these sort of pathologies, they just say, "Don't be ridiculous. This is absurd. We know that every day at work, the bosses try to shut us down. If we speak out, we intrinsically get the importance of free speech." And I think that's fundamentally the problem. And I don't think things are really going to change until the working class begins to move for itself again.
Well, yeah. That's about as good a historiography of it, I guess, would be the right way. I mean, Mike always talked about historicizing things and not naturalizing things, and that was about as good as answers I could have hoped for.
Nando, I actually want to ask one more question about this, because I really want to think about how we can strategically combat this culture, right? And I'm going to keep it real. I mean, it's difficult to do as someone who looks the way I do, right? And so it's very easy for people to just minimize what I'm trying to say or dismiss what I'm trying to say by putting me in a category of privilege and all of this. But what I'm trying to communicate, and I think what Michael was really trying to communicate before he passed, was if we really want to accomplish some of these lofty goals in this country or throughout the world, we need to be willing to appeal to a broader group of people and just be welcoming, and not present ourselves as individuals who are going to turn our backs on anyone for any past mistake, whether it's big or small. And so how do we communicate that in a way that doesn't just automatically get dismissed based on the way we look?
That's a question, isn't it? I don't know. I think we are going to see things change a little bit. I mean, just the discussion you guys have just had. I think a lot of people around Jacobin, more people are beginning to speak up. And I think part of it comes down to just confidence. So many people have written me emails or DMs saying, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I'm afraid to say it. And the more that we speak out against this, the more people have the confidence that they're not alone in this. So these kinds of conversations are utterly essential.
Well, Leigh, thank you so much for joining us. This was absolutely fascinating. Again, I highly recommend Leigh's writing, recommend his books. Like that confidence that Leigh was just talking about, he has it in spades because he's done the work and he's been around. He didn't just join this kind of thing in the last 2 seconds. So he's got some context. So Leigh, thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
All right. Take care, guys.
All righty. You know what? Let's keep it rolling unless you want to take a break, Nando.
No, I don't need to pee or anything like that. I'm good.
I know, me either. I'm loving this show today. So why don't we do our SALT segment? And you're the one who brought this to our attention, and I absolutely love it. So I'll set the story up and we can talk about it. So there is currently a full-blown assault on the Postal Service by the Trump administration in an attempt to basically rig the 2020 election. We're still in the middle of this pandemic with no end in sight, honestly, because of the mismanagement of this pandemic. And so many people are going to want to vote by mail. That only makes sense. And so Trump realizes this, and he has decided to do what he can to, first of all, make people question the, I guess, safety of voting by mail. He has floated this nonsense talking point about how voting by mail leads to voter fraud. There's absolutely no evidence of that. But there's also a postmaster general in charge now, Louis DeJoy, who is a Trump loyalist. He has donated upwards of $2 million to Donald Trump and Republicans lately. And so these are all things that people are concerned about. And Trump was very transparent in saying that he does not want to provide any funding to the post office in the next coronavirus stimulus bill because it's going to help Democrats out. He just doesn't want that. So he's being very transparent. And so it is interesting to see corporate Democrats in the media specifically speak out in support of the post office, the importance of the post office. How can this happen? But David Sirota, who is really saltier, the saltiest one in this segment, and has an incredible memory, shared some screenshots with people on Twitter yesterday. And so I want to share them with you. Here's the tweet. Maybe it's bad that high-profile Dems and pundits have been part of the movement demonizing the post office. And so I want to share some of those images that he embedded with you. Kevin Drum once published a piece. Why not finish privatizing the Postal Service?
Well, this wasn't ancient history. This Kevin Drum piece came out like yesterday or the day before. It's spectacular that guy still is around. I mean, he's one of the early 2000s kind of blogosphere guys who somehow is still surviving and publishing these terrible liberal takes. This was this week. This wasn't like ancient history, but the other ones are ancient history and they're great.
Yeah, this one was written by Matthew Iglesias in July of 2012. Tomorrow's going postal. Tomorrow's $5.5 billion default is the beginning of the end for the U.S. Postal Service. It's time to privatize it. Yeah. So,
Iglesias, man. Again, another one of these early 2000s liberal blogosphere guys who he's been one of the most successful ones. I mean, Vox has been just spectacularly successful. And it's fun to dunk on Iglesias because he's very dumb, but I want to like remove it from Iglesias himself as the person, and just it's more about ideology. The reason why we can go back to all kinds of terrible Iglesias takes in the past, like for example, letting workers in the third world die of fire in a factory because these regulations are bad, is because it's the ideology that leads logically towards those bad takes. Right, it's the dominant liberal ideology of which Iglesias is one of the high priests of. That's why it's so easy to just like Google search Iglesias from 2010 or earlier or whatever, like whether it's the Iraq War or worker protections or privatizing the postal service. Like that's why they're always wrong, because their ideology is wrong.
Yeah. And also, there was a sobering tweet by the Lincoln Project, which is a group of never Trump Republicans. They're, of course, endorsing Biden because they want Trump out. But they weighed in on this whole postal service issue by basically urging private companies like FedEx and UPS to deliver the ballots. Because, privatized companies doing that would make me feel a lot better about the situation. I mean, come on. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're so right about the ideology behind these takes. And, it's incredible how someone like Trump, right, can really reveal like all of their faults and all of their mistakes and how wrong they've been. But they never correct course. Yeah. They still stick to the same nonsense and people still find them credible. Like that's the thing that blows my mind. I mean, just going back to the Joe Biden video that we were showing. Joe Biden, at this point in the pandemic, as tens of millions of Americans have lost their private health insurance because they got fired, laid off, furloughed, he's still saying like, no, our system's great. All we need to do is provide a public option, which would be underfunded, which would probably be very useless, which we probably wouldn't even try to pass in my administration. Let's keep it real. Like, I mean, he has spent so much time since he won the nomination, basically slapping progressives in the face. Yeah. I mean, AOC gets a pre-recorded 60-second speech, literally, at the DNC.
And John Kasich gets his prime speaking spot, and so does Mike Bloomberg. Talk about intersectionality. But it's we're talking a lot about Mike this show because it was his birthday. But one of the things he loved to talk about was that even if he disagreed with like the awful neoliberal Democrats and Tony Blair types from the 1990s, he could respect their kind of strategic hustle and their ability to just have like some sort of backbone and actually like exercise power. And today's Democrats like and liberals just don't have even that. Like, I mean, they have the same terrible takes, but they don't have the sort of same savvy to exercise power. I just been laughing kind of darkly at this whole post office thing because like the right, does the thing where they always do where like it's like they do some insane thing, like try to abolish the mail, and then the liberals just like their only response these days is like, oh man, that's terrible. Someone should do something about that. It's either that or like begging Jeff Bezos to save them. Like people are tweeting at Jeff Bezos, like being like, you could step up and use like your, like your thing to take up the USPS vote by mail thing, or like begging like Dan Dresner, who's like one of these like foreign policy magazine liberals, was like tweeting out like, hey, FedEx and UPS, you guys can be heroes and become the most beloved corporations in America if you stepped up and delivered the mail ballots on November 3rd or whatever. And it's like, that's the only thing they can imagine. They can't imagine exercise power. They're like, someone should do something. Like Larry Charles tweeted at Gavin Newsom, Gavin Newsom tweeted out like, hey, the USPS should be fully funded. And then Larry Charles tweeted him and he was like, listen, dude, you're the governor of California, one of the most powerful states, like the most powerful, biggest state in the union, the GDP the size of like France. And, you could do something about it. You have power, like do something. Don't like just say someone should do something. You guys have power. Do it, like do something. 100%. Like Mitch McConnell, when he's in the minorities, throws sand in the gears all over the place. Like, let's do something about it.
No, I mean, no, that's the thing that drives me nuts, right? So I think social media, Twitter in particular, for average citizens, if you're engaging in any type of political rhetoric on Twitter, it gives you like it triggers the same parts of your brain that would be triggered if you're actually out on the streets organizing and doing the nitty gritty, like the real work necessary to organize and create real change in this country, right? Like when you're just tweeting, there have been some studies to show that it triggers the same part of your brain, even though that tweet essentially does nothing.
Nothing.
And now what we're seeing is like basically like woke Twitter activism by our elected lawmakers who are on vacation right now.
Yeah.
Okay. They're on recess, Senate and House of Representatives, while I mean, 1,000 people are dying a day from this pandemic. Donald Trump is trying to rig the election. There's still no agreement on a stimulus bill. Where are you guys? Get your asses back to Capitol Hill. Feckless losers. That's what we have elected in Congress right now.
Yes.
Okay. And it's just beyond frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. And yeah, why don't we go ahead and trust our democratic process in the hands of privatized companies who have a profit motive? Yeah, let's do. That's a great idea. Fantastic.
You know, Bhaskar Sunkara had a great piece in the Guardian this week on the U.S. Postal Service, and the U.S. Postal Service really is a remarkable organization in so many ways. I mean, it's a model that I think we should be using for a lot more things. You know, things like the news, for example, like is something that would be interesting to have, like a version of a public entity that did like the news, kind of, but with the same types of protections and independence that the U.S. Postal Service has. And you know, he was talking about how we should expand it to include, you know, postal banking, and you can even imagine like the U.S. Postal Service being able to like deliver food for the elderly and the poor who don't have it, because it's got this just a vast network and all these workers that are, you know, able to logistically handle all kinds of things. But yeah, it's just it's horrifying to see the dumb libs, just being like, oh my goodness, someone should do something like that, or like Kevin Drum writing in Mother Jones magazine, of all places, saying like, nah, you should just privatize it. That's a good idea. It's just, these people are they're feckless idiots. I hate them so much.
Definitely. And just to give everyone an update on a piece that David Sirota actually just published about the post office. You know, look, Trump was looking to dismantle the post office well before anyone even really realized it. And he did so with the help of a bipartisan effort in the Senate. So let me give you the details, and you guys can read this piece in Jacobin. So Sirota and Matthew Cunningham Cook write that Donald Trump and Washington lawmakers put the Postal Service under the control of a former Republican National Committee chairman who has also led the Senate GOP's major super PAC. Trump nominee Mike Duncan, also appointed to the USPS's Board of Governors in 2018, and was unanimously confirmed by the Senate in December of 2019 to a full 7-year term. Duncan currently chairs the board. So he has a massive amount of influence on the board of the Postal Service. And in 2018, federal disclosure filings during his confirmation indicated that Duncan listed himself as the current chairman of the Senate Leadership Fund, a $100 million Senate-focused Republican super PAC whose 2020 electoral goals could hinge on the vote-by-mail system during the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, just like the current Postmaster General, who is a Trump loyalist, he is invested in competitors to the U.S. Postal Service. So there is a vested interest to dismantle the Postal Service on top of basically rigging this upcoming general election.
You know, it's one of those things that you're just like, what do you know, it's just, everything is awful. I mean, the worst people in the world are in power. And we don't have a proper opposition party to do like even the bare minimum you can expect to at least make this a bigger issue, at least make this, you know, be real demagogues. I don't know, like get out there. I mean, look,
really I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, and I don't really care. I mean, you've heard Schumer and Pelosi speak, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are they effective, you know, using the bully pulpit? No, of course not. Of course. That's why they're giving AOC a 60-second speech that's pre-recorded and pre-approved. because she threatens, the Democratic establishment and their neoliberal ideology. And they know she's an effective speaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, Kale, do we have any,
come in here, baby.
So I have some bad
super chat
news.
questions?
I really liked your segment today, and I'm now canceled.
Oh no. Oh no.
Well, if people are getting canceled for liking my segment, I hope a lot of people get canceled today.
Oh yeah. If being canceled is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Today's show's been fantastic so far. Between the segments and Leigh, and we need to save the post office. Like, whatever you can do to call elected officials. There's different, there's some of that kind of like liberal pleading for help from the politicians, but sometimes just getting the phone calls does make a difference. So.
Yeah, it saved Obamacare, and when they tried to dismantle it. I think that the phone banking in that specific scenario definitely worked. So yeah, we got to save the post office. I mean, Bhaskar talks about it, like how it's one of the main, if not the main, drivers for upward mobility for like working class Black people, forever, just into like a unionized, safe job that pays well and has protections. Like, it's just, we got to save it.
Yeah, I have a family member who's a mechanic for the post office, who comes from a Cuban family, and has, definitely does drink the Kool-Aid about socialism and all that, anti-socialism. Anyway, but yeah, it's a great job. It's a fantastic job with benefits. I mean, he knows that, as long as he's able to keep that job, he's going to retire with a great pension. And, it's a unionized job. It's so important to save the post office. I've become so pessimistic because, as Nando mentioned, like who's the opposition party?
Yeah.
And at this point, I don't think Republicans even care about passing the next round of stimulus, because if they know they can rig the election, then like, who cares? Like, who cares about providing any economic relief to Americans right now? They don't care about anyone. And unfortunately, we don't have a proper opposition protecting us.
Right. And that's where so much of reactionary politics, conservative politics, it only gets through because of undemocratic means. And so it's all the more reason why the left has to be just unrelentingly democratic in their politics.
Yeah.
And that's an issue that the left has right now, that it's not unrelentingly democratic. And if people who are familiar with, when they're in left organizing spaces to varying degrees, I don't want to paint a broad picture, but I think the biggest issue for the American left is not being insufficiently socialist or being, too reformist or too revolutionary. It's insufficiently democratic, actually. And I think cancel culture is one of the most kind of, just poisonous manifestations of that, taking people down, not through a democratic process, not through holding a vote on something or through open debate and discussion. It's through, we have to get rid of our opposition and crush them and or silence them or put pressure on them to be, crushed or silenced. Or sometimes it's not so heavy-handed, but it's these, instead of actually debating and discussing these things, and then it drives a lot of normal people away. Because working people don't want to waste their time going through arguments with middle-class people over, did you use the right etiquette? Did you, have you bought into the cultural norms prior to joining the fight with us?
Yeah.
And the whole thing is, it's completely backwards. And I'm kind of preempting there's a super chat question from someone asking, do you think that approaching people who have unwoke views in a compassionate, empathetic way is more effective? And is that what cancel culture is? And I think my thoughts.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Easy answer.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's you build the kind of culture of respect and of compassion through the fight that you're in together. That you recognize people who are imperfect but have a similar goal, and you come to see them as decent, compassionate, fully human people that you want to work with because you have a common interest in working together.
Yeah, that's the key, is the common interest, is that, we stand more to gain ourselves, by doing that, not just, not by not putting other people down, that we do share the same self-interest in coming together. So yeah. Well, the good news is, Kale, someone gave $5 to uncancel you. It's like Robert Crandell said $5 to uncancel Kale. Kale rules. So good.
This is gonna take some extended scrubbing, so I probably can't uncancel at the moment, but I appreciate it.
And if I could just add to that, super chat question and, answer, look, I want to try to come at it from like my own personal experiences to like highlight how effective treating someone with compassion can really be. Because prior to meeting Michael, I can't tell you how many times, I would do a segment on TYT on anything, but let's say it touches on the economy or some sort of issue that's happening. And maybe my commentary wasn't fully informed, but the response that I would get from leftists would usually be, "You're so fucking stupid. It's late stage cap." And so like you preface it with fucking stupid. And I don't hear the late stage capitalism part at all. But Michael was sly. Cause he's always strategic, right? He was always strategic. And on top of that, he was just genuinely a good person.
Yeah.
And so I didn't even realize that it was happening. But just by reaching out, becoming a friend and engaging in these conversations with me in this like non-judgmental way, like opened me up to a completely different understanding of the world around me. Yeah. And that is what we want to do, right? I mean, I'm sure plenty of people on the left would have canceled me or have canceled me because of my views on capitalism in the past. But people are gettable. I remember Nando said that to me in private last week. I was like, you and Michael, like you guys, why weren't you guys dismissive? And Nando said you were gettable. And so I was like, you know what? You're right. Yeah, you're right.
Some people aren't gettable, like I don't think Iglesias is gettable. I'm not going to waste my time trying to get Iglesias, but but some people are, and it's you just need some humanity to be able to recognize that.
And it can't be a foregone conclusion that someone you haven't met is already ungettable, or that.
Well, I haven't met Iglesias, but I'm foregoing that conclusion. Yeah.
Fair. No, but right. I mean, there's some people that it's very obvious because their entire career is built off of promoting certain political ideas or projects, or there's limitations, of course, but I think this is like, if the right, this is kind of, I'm paraphrasing a Michael Harrington quote, that it's like if the left wants to change America because it thinks it's like deeply like evil and wrong, then like people are not going to join you. They're not going to trust you. I think like the left has to, the starting point is that most people are good and want a better life, and that it's capitalism that drives us into these horrible, precarious situations. And sorry, Anna, you wanted to...
No, I wanted you to finish your point, because I think what you're saying is a good like preface to a quote that I want to read by Ben Burgess. So go ahead.
Right. Well, I think it's just, by and large, I think the liberal attitude on politics is that people are mean and bad and wrong and stupid. And I think that's kind of overwhelmingly the thrust of this, is that people are stupid and that they don't know what they need. They don't know, they have bad intentions, and they make bad choices.
Vote against their interests. That's like, they love that. They love that line.
Yeah. As if people have good choices to begin with. Like that's the problem, that like people, so it's, and this, obviously, like, I'm hoping that Biden wins. I'm hoping that that's the world we live in a couple months, and like that the left can fight against, Biden and, potentially sooner than later, Kamala Harris, leading the
Kamala.
country. Pardon me.
You toxic, masculine, stupid
I
Kale.
just gotta do it again.
Double canceled.
So
yeah.
But
no. And by the way, to that point, I mean, like, FDR didn't push for the New Deal out of like the goodness of his heart, So, as Michael would say, you got to think strategically, and really the power is in our hands. We need to fight, but in order to fight, we need allies. we need a broader base. We need to spread our ideas far and wide in a way that's appealing, non-judgmental. And, you know, a lot of our emphasis has been on capitalism and, you know, basically finding a strategic way to dismantle that system. But, you know, a lot of the cancel culture conversation right now does also revolve around racism and racial issues. And, you know, Ben Burgess had a really great line. I thought it was just so powerful in his recently published piece in the Jacobin. And this is what he says. He says, real cultural freedom requires a far more economically equal society. And we all want to live our lives, right? But we're constantly like finding ourselves in this fight for survival. And you just can't really feel free. Like if you really step back and look at what you do on a daily basis just to survive, I mean, do you feel free?
No.
Do you feel culturally free? No. And so I thought that was a powerful line and something that we need to consider.
Yeah, and you know, so much of the liberal discourse around things like white men, you know, is just so counterproductive. You know, like it's obviously there's going to be a backlash to that. Like, I mean, a white man was born a white man through no fault of his own, and then this idea that there should be no cultural exchange in any way. Like, I saw like some insane piece in Vice this week, and it's fun to dunk on the insane pieces, but it's internalized in a lot of ways. But like, it was like the vegan, it's something along the lines of like the vegan food community has to like check its like appropriation of like non-white foods or some insane thing like that. And it's like, what do you guys like? You guys want like a fully racially segregated society? Like, you guys really want like what the Nazis wanted in that sense. And it's like cultural exchange is the most beautiful thing you can imagine. Melding different things from different cultures is the most beautiful thing you can imagine. I mean, you know, Mike, for example, loved Black culture. He just did. You know, he loved hip hop. He loved reggae. He found inspiration from Black liberation struggles and things like that. You know, like, that's not appropriation. That's not bad. That's a good thing. That is an absolute good thing, and it makes him a more full, better person. But like the sort of liberal line has become, you know, like, that's actually really bad. You can't do that.
Well, I really think that is, I don't think it's an accident. I mean, this is meant to create factions on the left, and it has, you know, it's a way to disempower us. And we're experiencing that right now. We're too busy fighting each other instead of celebrating one another and finding ways to, you know, consolidate as a group to fight aggressively for the things that we know we desperately need. We need to know our enemies, right? Like, know your enemies. I don't think that we really have fully identified and accepted who the real enemies are. And the people who prey on progressive candidates who are primarying disgusting corporatist Democrats, you know, they use cancel culture as a weapon to destroy them. I mean, that's exactly what happened with Alex Morse. They're trying to do it with Shahid Buttar. I'm seeing
Cale
it.
Brooks.
I mean, I definitely experienced it. I'm sorry, say that again.
No, they're doing it to Cale Brooks.
Cale Brooks, you know, canceled twice in like the same like 15 minutes. Jeez.
I'm still standing. I'm still here.
Well, people don't realize Cale Brooks' mother's from Argentina, so Cale Brooks is actually Latinx.
What the fuck, dude?
Now
you know,
they're canceled.
Yeah, it's Latinx. But okay, on a more serious note, though, like, this isn't a. I don't, you know, just objectively, the American left is primarily a middle class formation, and for better or worse, sometimes it's to our benefit to have a ton of great designers on our team. But at the same time, like, you know, what that means is that most people who are in this fight, I'm not saying all, but I would say an outsized portion, maybe more than historically has been the case, are doing this for moral reasons, that it's a moral commitment to wanting justice. And that's totally legitimate, of course. Like, you know, I'm a video producer, like, at a magazine. I'm middle class. Like, I mostly have a moral commitment to socialism. But the thing is that when all you have is the moral case, like, you have a greater chance of spiraling out into things like cancel culture or these like the kind of the most regressive versions of moralism, of taking people down because they weren't morally correct enough or morally pure enough or whatever. not everyone, but obviously that's kind of the worst end of the stick with that. But like historically, the left, like the glue that keeps people together is the material needs, that you say like, we're in this fight because we have a material stake in this.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the challenge for the left, is figuring out how to, bring our politics to people who by and large have the material stake in the project that we're advocating for. And I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
That's you're right. I mean, I did not grow up working class. I have a moral commitment to socialism. I don't have, I've never wanted for anything in my life. But I think what you're talking about, Kale, again, I think Bernie was the most effective version of that. I mean, he did make more inroads with the working class than any other leftist has in decades. And whether we have our strategic quibbles with him or his decision to endorse Biden or all that stuff, at the end of the day, he did put together a coalition of working class people that we haven't seen in decades. Which is why I think like the left impulse to be like, Bernie abandoned us or, whatever, like that's just dumb. We have to build on that. We have to re-engage with that. And that sort of simple bread and butter message that Bernie had, his ruthless kind of discipline in just talking about the class war and Medicare for all and the green, like, you know what I mean? Like just the three big things, like never getting into any of the culture war stuff, because that is just a massive turnoff to people. It just is. It's never going to work. Ever. So, I think we have to build on that, not just like be like, no, Bernie, bullshit. Shut up.
And my last point on this is just that when you're on the left, as an organizer, you have to figure out how to work with people where they're at. And you need to figure out how to build those coalitions, make those connections, bring them over to your side. And so, like you were saying, Anna, a moment ago, like if someone starts off with like, well, listen here, fuckface, if you haven't read Ernst Mandel's like Capitalism, then it's not going to work, right?
Look, sounds like a trot, like it's like, shut up, man. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right. We're not trying to police what's in people's minds. We're trying to figure out how to form political projects that lead to certain outcomes. And so you have to work with where people are at. And you don't ever give up the certain political and social rights that are part of socialism. It necessarily means, like, in addition to bread and butter issues, it also means certain political rights in society, that we treat people fully human, right? But we're not in socialism just yet, and you have to bring people there. It's a process of convincing someone of an argument, not telling them they're wrong and like, shut the fuck up. Either you're with me or you're with the system that is hegemonic and is not going away anytime soon. Like, you have to build up your side of you have to fight for your argument, and you have to pull people to your side in this fight. And it's going to be hard and it's going to take a while. But Bernie also like took us light years ahead than where we were 10 years ago. So I don't know. I just love Bernie.
You want to you want to invite people to your party and hope they're going to show up because you got chips and salsa and some nice cocktail, right? People are going to come to your party if you have like cameras set up to catch them, fucking up, so you can put them on blast on Twitter. Yeah. Exactly.
You should encourage that. You should encourage, like, there's fucking in the bathroom going on at all my parties. It's super fun. No one's going to tell on you.
All right.
Well, yeah.
Well, this technically was the super chat portion of the show, but
I like it.
Maybe that's a good place to end, actually.
All right, everyone, check out all the other video series on the Jacobin YouTube channel. It's excellent. I absolutely love it. And our good friend and frequent Jacobin contributor, Ben Burgess, has his own show. And I tweeted the link to it if you'd like to watch. It airs after this show. And I'll be on it today, but that part doesn't matter. Yeah. It's just a fantastic show.
No, it does matter.
So make sure you check it out.
It does matter. And I'll be on in September at some point. So I'm very excited about that.
Nice.
Ben Burgess is great.
I love it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.